I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you clearly don't know your place.
Preston Hargrove III leaned forward with a sudden, aggressive burst of motion, driving his expensive gold pen down onto the glass table right in front of the quiet black woman. His face was contorted in pure, credentialed condescension, his jaw moving with venomous anger as he barked a cold laugh through the room.
This is Hargrove Whitfield. We manage serious wealth for serious families, not cents for community charities. Look at your plain coat. Look at your hands. People like you keep thinking a classroom degree makes you belong in a room of old money. It doesn't. You've been wasting my partner's time for 3 hours in the lobby, so let me have security walk you out before you embarrass your people any further. Go home and don't come back until you can bring a real white financial advisor who actually speaks our language.
The two junior partners flanking him chuckled out loud, one flipping his phone over without even looking at her. They expected this middle-aged black woman to break, to cry, or to leave in silent humiliation. They had absolutely no idea. They didn't know that the leather folder resting on her lap contained a single, signed document, a $1,200 million institutional mandate that his firm had been begging for, in 7 separate urgent emails, all week long, and the only name with the absolute power to grant it, or permanently destroy it, was hers. You are watching Black Stories, where arrogance meets immediate corporate reckoning, and silent dignity rewrites the rules of power. Preston Hargrove believed he was teaching a lesson to an invisible outsider, but by the end of the hour, his words would cost his family 40 years of elite reputation and the single largest financial loss in the firm's history. To understand how a historic $1.2 billion mandate walked straight out of their glass tower, we have to go back exactly 11 hours to a quiet morning drive, an old brass slide rule, and a woman who had learned a long time ago exactly how the world would try to shrink her, and exactly how to hit back with the math they couldn't touch. The car was a 4-year-old hybrid, washed but unremarkable, and Vivian Asante was driving it herself. That was the first decision, and she made it the way. She made every decision. On purpose. She could have had a car. Sankofa had 3 of them, and a driver named Earl, who had been with her since the beginning, and who would happily have fought traffic at 6 in the morning, so she didn't have to. She had told him to sleep in. She wanted to arrive the way her clients arrived. The teachers whose pensions she protected didn't roll up to anything in a chauffeured sedan. The longshoremen, whose retirement she had spent a decade defending from people exactly like Preston Hargrove, didn't have an entourage. So when Vivian went to look a firm in the eye and decide whether to trust them with $1 billion of other people's futures, she went the way those people would go. Alone, quiet, watching. Her father had taught her that Kwame Asante had come to this country with an engineering degree from Kumasi and an accent that made every interviewer assume he couldn't do the job he had already done for 15 years. He spent his first 2 American years calculating load tolerances for bridges his name would never appear on. While men half as good signed the drawings, he never once raised his voice about it. He just got better, and quieter, and more necessary, until the day came when a tower they were building started to lean 3 degrees more than the model allowed. And every credentialed man in the room went pale. And Kwame Asante put down his coffee, walked to the board, and did the math that saved the building and the 11 men who would have been standing under it. They will look at your hands before they look at your mind. he had told her. The night she got into business school, holding her face in two rough palms that had built things this country still stood on. Let them. It costs you nothing. Then you do the math they cannot do. And you do it so well that the looking stops mattering. He had pressed something into her hand. His brass slide rule, worn smooth, the one he had carried across an ocean. Carry this, not because you need it, because it remembers where you come from when the rooms try to make you forget. It was in her bag now, on the passenger seat, next to the leather folder. 30 years later, she didn't need it. She carried it anyway. The highway peeled north. Glass towers rising out of the morning haze like something built by people who had never been told no. Vivian let the silence sit. She liked the quiet before a hard day. It was the last private thing she would have until sundown. Sankofa Capital had not existed 20 years ago. There had been only Vivian, a doctorate in financial economics, a stack of rejection letters from firms exactly like the one she was driving toward, and a single furious observation. The smartest money in the country flowed past the people who needed it most, because the men who controlled it could not imagine those people deserved it. Pension funds for teachers got handed to managers who treated them like an afterthought. Endowments for black colleges got the second-string team, and the higher fees, union retirement money, the savings of people who broke their bodies for 40 years, got managed with a carelessness that would have ended a career if the clients had been white and rich. So she built the firm that wouldn't do that. She named it Sankofa, for the old Akan word, for the bird that flies forward while looking back. Go back and get what was left behind. She started with one client, a single battered teacher's local that no one else would touch, and she made them money so consistently, so unflashily, so responsibly, that other people who had been treated like afterthoughts started to call 20 years later. Sankofa advised on the placement of capital for a coalition that had become, quietly, one of the most powerful blocks of institutional money in the region. Not the loudest, not the richest per household, but disciplined, patient, enormous in aggregate, and absolutely united, because Vivian had earned a kind of trust that money normally cannot buy. When Sankofa decided to move $1 billion, $1 billion moved. And right now, Sankofa was deciding the coalition had a mandate to place $1.2 billion to be managed under a new, long-horizon strategy. Vivian had run a search, the way she ran everything, methodically, ruthlessly, without sentiment. 40 firms had pitched. The list had been cut to 12. Then 5. Then 2. 2 finalists. One of them was a mid-sized shop run by a woman Vivian respected. Lean and hungry and very, very good. The other was Hargrove Whitfield. She had her doubts about Hargrove Whitfield. The numbers were strong. Nobody got to $40 billion under management by being stupid with money, but something in the way they had courted her had set a small, cold alarm ringing in the back of her mind. The emails had been addressed to her deputy, not to her. The calls had assumed, every single time, that the real decision-maker was someone else, some man, somewhere, whose schedule mattered more than hers. When her chief of staff told them the chief investment officer herself would conduct the final on-site, there had been a pause on the line, A small one. The kind of pause a person makes when the picture in their head does not match the words coming through it. Vivian had heard that pause 1,000 times in her life. She knew exactly what it meant. So, she had made another decision. She would not warn them. She would not arrive with a delegation and a deck and a flotilla of associates that announced, "Important person incoming." She would go in plain. One coat. One folder. No fanfare. She would let them show her. With no performance for an audience. Exactly how Hargrove Whitfield treated a black woman they assumed was nobody, because here was the thing about due diligence that the men in the glass towers never understood. You can audit a firm's returns all day long. The returns tell you whether they are smart. They do not tell you who they are. And Vivian Asante had buried too many promising relationships and protected too many vulnerable clients to ever again hand $1 billion to people whose character she had not personally watched under pressure. "Let them look at your hands," her father said, in the part of her mind where he still lived. "Then do the math." She pulled into the underground garage at 8:42 in the morning. She parked the unremarkable car in visitor parking between a Bentley and a Range Rover. She took her plain coat, her old leather folder, and her father's slide rule. She rode the elevator up alone. The doors opened on the 40th floor, and Vivian Asante walked into Hargrove Whitfield to find out who they really were. They were about to tell her. At length, the lobby of Hargrove Whitfield was designed to make you feel small. Vivian recognized the technique the moment the elevator opened, because she had seen it in a dozen buildings, just like this one. And because it was the same trick her father's bridges used in reverse, a great structure can be built to make a person feel held, lifted, part of something larger than themselves. Or it can be built to make a person feel like an intruder in a temple. Hargrove Whitfield had chosen the temple. The ceilings went up 20 feet. The floor was a single slab of pale marble veined with gold, polished to a mirror, so that every footstep echoed and announced you. One wall was glass from floor to ceiling. The whole city laid out beneath it, like a thing the firm owned. The other wall held the names Hargrove, Whitfield, cut into stone, 2 feet tall, lit from below, and beneath them a row of oil portraits, 4 generations of pale, satisfied men in dark suits, each one looking down on the lobby with the particular expression of someone who has never once in his life been asked to prove that he belonged somewhere. At the center of it all, behind a curved desk of black stone, sat a young woman with a headset and a smile she could turn on and off like a tap. Her name was Brooke. Vivian would learn that later. Right now, she was simply the gate. And the gate looked up as Vivian's plain shoes crossed the marble. And something in Brooke's face did the thing Vivian had spent her whole life learning to read. It was not hostility. It was something quieter and, in its way, worse. It was recalculation. The smile dimmed by precisely 1 degree. The eyes did a fast, unconscious sweep. The coat, not expensive. The bag, not a designer label. The shoes, sensible. The skin, brown. And arrived at a conclusion before Vivian had said a single word. "Can I help you?" Brooke said. The warmth that had been in her voice for the phone a second earlier was gone. This was the other voice, the one for deliveries. "Good morning," Vivian said. pleasant. Avon, I have a 9 o'clock with Mr. Clock. Hargrove and the institutional team. Vivian Asante. Brooke's manicured finger hovered over her screen. She did not look at it. And this is regarding the Sankofa mandate. Flicker. Recognition of the word. Maybe. But not of the woman attached to it. Brooke's eyes did the sweep again. Slower this time. The way you double-check a number that doesn't add up. The picture in her head and the person in front of her were not matching what. And rather than change the picture, Brooke did what people like Brooke always did. She tried to fix the person. Are you? With one of the vendors, Brooke asked. Catering's supposed to use the service entrance. Hone. It's around the back. By the loading dock. I'm not with catering, Vivian said. No edge in it. Just fact. Oh. A pause. Brooke tried again. Are you here to interview because HR does first rounds on Thursdays? So if you were told today, somebody gave you bad information. I'm not here to interview. Vivian set her folder gently on the black stone desk. I'm Dr. Vivian Asante. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Sankofa Capital. Your firm invited me. I'm a little early. I'm happy to wait. For one full second. Brooke just looked at her. And in that second, Vivian watched the young woman make a choice. She could have apologized. She could have said, of course, Dr. Asante, let them know you're here. Can I get you anything? The information had been given. The correction had been clear. A person who respected the woman in front of her would have adjusted. Brooke did not adjust. Instead, her smile came back. Not the warm one. A new one. Thin and faintly amused. The smile of someone who has decided that the person in front of them is mistaken about their own importance and is going to be gently, professionally managed back into their place. Okay, Brooke said, drawing the word out. Let me see if anyone's available. They're very busy this morning. Why don't you have a seat? She gestured, without looking, toward a low cluster of leather chairs by the glass wall. Over there. Not please. Not. I'm so sorry for the confusion. Just over there. The corner. The waiting place. Vivian picked up her folder. Thank you, she said, and meant it as a kind of test of her own composure. The way her father used to thank the men who passed him over, not because they deserved it, but because his calm was a thing no one could take from him. She walked to the leather chairs and sat down, her coat folded over her knee. Her father's slide rule a small, hard shape in the bag beside her, and she settled in to watch. She had a feeling she was going to be there a while. She was right. 9 o'clock came. 9 o'clock went. Vivian sat in the leather chair by the glass and watched the lobby of Hargrove Whitfield breathe. She had trained herself, over decades, to be the most patient person in any room, and she had learned that patience was not passive. Patience was a kind of seeing. While she waited, she watched, and the lobby taught her everything she needed to know. At 9:15, the elevator opened, and a man in a $6,000 suit walked in. White, 60-something, gold watch catching the light. Brooke's whole body changed. She rose halfway out of her chair. The warm voice was back, dialed to 11. Mr. Pemberton, so good to see you. They're expecting you. Go right up. You know the way. Can I have Lauren bring you a coffee? Mr. Pemberton did not break stride. He was waved through the marble like a member of the family. And the elevator that took him up was the express. Vivian noted the time. She noted that no one had asked Mr. Pemberton what he was regarding. At 9:40, a couple arrived, silver-haired, country club tan, the woman in pearls, the man with the unbothered ease of someone who has never carried his own bag. Brooke nearly levitated. A junior partner materialized out of nowhere to greet them personally. Hands clasped, leading them toward the glass conference rooms, with a stream of warm chatter. Coffee appeared. Pastries appeared. The couple was received. Vivian had now been waiting nearly an hour. No one had offered her water. At about 10, a young man came through a side door, pushing a cart of mail and printer paper. He was black, maybe 22, in a polo shirt with the building services logo. And he moved through the lobby. The way Vivian's father had once moved through buildings, he was good enough to design, but not good enough to be seen in. Quickly, quietly, eyes down, taking up as little space as the marble would allow. His name tag said Devon. Devon clocked her. Vivian saw it happen. The small double take of one person recognizing another. The recognition that has nothing to do with knowing someone, and everything to do with knowing a situation. He saw a black woman sitting alone in the cold corner of a lobby that had been performing warmth at white visitors all morning. And he understood the whole story in a glance. Because he lived a version of it 5 days a week. He finished his route. He could have left. Instead, a minute later, he came back through the side door. And this time, he was carrying a small bottle of water and a paper napkin. And he walked over and crouched down next to Vivian's chair, so he wouldn't loom. And he said, very quietly, so the desk wouldn't hear, "Ma'am, you've been sitting here a while. I don't know if anybody offered you anything." He held out the water. "It's just from the back." But I figured something moved in Vivian's chest, in a morning built to make her feel like nothing. This 22-year-old with a mail cart was the first person in the building to treat her like a human being. And he was the one person in the building with the least to gain by doing it. She took the water. "Thank you, Devon," she said, reading his name tag, giving him his name back the way she always tried to give people their names. Because she knew what it cost to feel nameless in a room. "You? With one of the funds?" he asked. Still quiet. "Something like that," she said. He glanced toward the conference rooms, then back at her, and lowered his voice. "Another notch. They had you waiting since 9. Since before 9? Devon's jaw tightened. Just slightly. He didn't say anything cruel about his employer. He couldn't afford to. But he held her eyes for a second. And what passed between them did not need words. "I see what they're doing. I'm sorry. I see you." Then he stood, because the desk was starting to look over. And he said, louder, in the neutral voice, "You let me know if you need anything else. Mom." And he wheeled his cart away. Vivian uncapped the water and drank. And in that moment, she made a small private note. The kind of note that would matter enormously by the end of the day, whatever happened in the glass room upstairs. The young man named Devon, the one person here who had chosen dignity when it cost him something, was going to be fine. She would see to it personally. By 10:30, she had been waiting an hour and a half. She took out her phone and texted her chief of staff. Ray Boyd. 3 words. Still in lobby. Renee texted back instantly. They know you're there, Vivian. They know. A pause. Then Renee. Want me to call Marcus Webb and light a fire. Marcus Webb was Hargrove Whitfield's head of institutional sales. The man who had sent all 7 begging emails. The man who had courted Sankofa for 14 months. The man who had, crucially, never once actually met Vivian in person. Dealing only with her deputy. Vivian considered it. Then she typed, "No, let it run. I want to see the whole thing," because she did. She wanted the complete, unedited picture. She wanted to know, not guess, know. Whether the contempt in this building was one bad gatekeeper, or whether it went all the way up, there was only one way to find out. And that was to let it keep happening and watch how high it climbed. It was about to climb to the very top. But first, it sent a junior partner, nearly an hour later. Almost 2.5 hours after her scheduled meeting, a junior partner named Tucker Vance came down to deal with the problem in the lobby. That was how he thought of it. Vivian could see it in the way he walked. Not toward a valued guest. Toward a problem. Tucker Vance was maybe 34. With the gym-shaped shoulders and the aggressive haircut of a man who had spent his 20s being told he was the future. His shirt was crisp. His shoes were loud. He carried a tablet he didn't open. And he arrived in front of Vivian's chair, wearing the expression of a man doing someone a favor. "Hi there," he said, in the slow, over-articulated voice some people reserve for the elderly, for non-native speakers, and for anyone they have already decided is beneath them. "I'm Tucker. I'm one of the partners here. I understand there's been a little mix-up." "There's no mix-up," Vivian said. "I have a meeting. I've been waiting since 9. Right? Right." Tucker nodded, as if she had confirmed something. He did not sit down. He stood over her, which Vivian recognized as a deliberate choice. "So here's the thing. I pulled up the calendar, and I gotta be honest with you, I'm not seeing your name on anything with the partners today." He gave her a smile of professional regret. "Now, sometimes what happens is, a smaller fund will reach out, and one of our associates takes a call. And somewhere along the way, wires get crossed, and somebody thinks they've got a meeting on the books with leadership, when really it was more of a preliminary conversation. With the team that handles emerging accounts, does that maybe sound like what happened here?" It did not sound like what happened. What happened was that his own firm had spent 14 months chasing her and had confirmed this exact meeting in writing 3 times. But Vivian did not say that yet. She wanted to see how far Tucker would go on his own. "I'm Dr. Vivian Asante," she said again, patiently. "Sankofa Capital. The mandate." Tucker's eyes lit with a kind of relief, because now he thought he understood. "Sankofa," he repeated, nodding, and Vivian watched him file her into the only folder his mind had for her. "Right. Okay. That's a community-focused fund. Yeah, mission-driven. Social impact. That kind of thing." He said, "Social impact the way another man might say finger painting." "Look, that's great work. It really is. Somebody's got to do it. But I think there might have been some confusion about scale, the kind of accounts the senior partners take face-to-face meetings for. We're talking institutional. Big institutional. 9, ton figure. And I would love to set you up with the right person on our emerging and diverse accounts desk who can walk you through some of our entry products. We've got some really nice options for funds that are earlier in their growth journey. Entry products, Vivian repeated softly. Vehicles with lower minimums, Tucker explained. Helpful, as if she might not know the words. Get your foot in the door. Build a track record with us. And then, as you scale up, we revisit. Everybody starts somewhere. Right. He smiled. I started in the mailroom. He had not started in the mailroom. Vivian would have bet her father's slide rule on it. She let a beat pass. The lobby was very quiet. Brooke, at the black desk, was watching with the faint pleasure of someone whose judgment is being confirmed. And Vivian, sitting in the leather chair with a junior partner standing over her, offering her entry products for the billion-dollar mandate his bosses had been on their knees begging for, felt the old, familiar thing rise in her chest. The fury. Controlled. Banked low. The fury her father had taught her to keep like a fire. You don't let anyone see you carrying. Mr. Vance, she said. I appreciate the explanation. I'd like to keep my meeting with Mr. Hargrove. If he's running late, I'll continue to wait. But I'm not in the wrong building. And I'm not at the wrong firm. And I'm not interested in entry products. Something in her tone, the absolute steadiness of it, made Tucker hesitate for half a second. He covered it with a laugh. Okay, I hear you. You're confident. I respect that, he said, in a tone that respected nothing. Tell you what, let me go check with Preston's assistant. See what we can do. But I gotta be straight with you. And here he leaned down, lowering his voice, doing the thing people do when they're about to say something cruel and want to dress it as honesty. Preston Hargrove's calendar is the most valuable real estate in this city. He does not do meet and greets. So, if there's been a misunderstanding about what today was, the kindest thing I can do is tell you now. So, you're not sitting here all day on a hope. You understand what I'm saying. I understand exactly what you're saying. Vivian said. And she did. She understood it completely. Go ahead and check. Tucker straightened, gave her a little two-finger salute that was somehow more insulting than anything he had said out loud, and walked off toward the elevators, already half laughing about it to himself. Vivian sat very still. She uncapped Devon's bottle of water and took a sip. Her hand did not shake. Inside her, she did a thing she had done 1,000 times. She took the heat she was feeling and she turned it, slowly, deliberately, into something cold and clear and useful. Anger was a fire. Fire was just energy. And energy, properly directed, did work. She took out her phone. She did not text Renee this time. She opened her notes. And in her steady, methodical way, she began to write down the morning. Times. Namis. Words. 9 o'clock scheduled. 9:15. Pemberton. Express. No questions. 9:40. Country club couple. Partner greeting. Coffee. Pastries. 10 o'clock. Devon. Water. The only one. Tucker Vance. Entry products. Emerging and diverse desk. Everybody starts somewhere. You're in the wrong building. She wrote it all down, not because she would ever need it to remember. She would remember every second of this morning for the rest of her life, but because writing it down was how she stayed cold, how she turned humiliation into a record, how she made sure that when the time came, she would be exact, because the time was going to come, and when it did, she had learned. The difference between a person who gets dismissed and a person who gets remembered is whether they can name precisely and without anger every single thing that was done to them. She finished writing. She put the phone away. And close to noon, almost 3 hours after she had walked across that marble floor, Tucker Vance reappeared with a tight, false smile and said the words that would, in a few more minutes, become the most expensive sentence anyone at Hargrove Whitfield had ever spoken. Good news, he said. Preston can give you a few minutes. He's got a hard stop. So, let's keep it brief. Okay, come on up. Vivian rose, smoothed her plain coat, picked up her old leather folder, and followed him to the elevator. It was time to find out who Preston Hargrove III really was. The conference room was on the 42nd floor, and it was the kind of room built for closing, not for talking. A single slab of black glass for a table, long enough to seat 20, with 8 chairs occupied now by people who had decided in advance that the meeting they were attending was a courtesy. At the head of the table sat Preston Hargrove III. He was 61, and he wore his power the way fourth-generation money wears everything, without effort, without doubt, without the faintest awareness that it could ever be questioned. Silver hair, swept back, a suit so well made it looked like a second skin, a tan from somewhere with a coastline, and a smile that arrived on his face the instant Vivian walked in, wide and white and completely, perfectly empty. The smile of a man being gracious to someone he has already decided does not matter. He did not stand. That was the first thing Vivian noticed. Because she noticed everything, and because she knew what it meant. The country club couple downstairs had gotten a partner rising out of his chair. She got a man who stayed seated, gestured loosely at the far end of the 20-foot table, and said, "There she is. Come on in. Have a seat. We'll make this work." Vivian sat, not at the far end. She took a chair near the middle, close enough to be heard, and she set her leather folder on the black glass in front of her and folded her hands on top of it. "So," Preston said, lacing his fingers, leaning back, "Tucker tells me there's been some confusion downstairs, and I want to clear it up, because I hate for anybody to leave this building feeling like they weren't taken care of." His tone was warm, and his eyes were ice. "We're a relationship business. We pride ourselves on it. So let me make sure I understand who I'm talking to. You're with a fund called Sankofa. I founded it," Vivian said. "I'm the chief investment officer." "Wonderful." He said it the way you would praise a child's drawing. "And you're here about—" Tucker said something about a mandate, a $1 billion, $200 million mandate. Vivian said, "Your firm is one of 2 finalists. I'm here for the final on-site, as your team requested." In writing, 3 times, a small ripple went around the table. A couple of the partners glanced at each other, but Preston Hargrove did not so much as blink, because Preston Hargrove had spent 61 years being the most important person in every room, and a number, even a very large number, coming out of the mouth of a black woman in a plain coat simply did not compute as real. He had a category for her, and the category did not include 12-figure mandates. And so his mind did what powerful men's minds do when reality contradicts their assumptions. It discarded reality. He chuckled. He actually chuckled. And then the warmth drained out of his face all at once. And the thing that had been underneath it the whole time came up to the surface. And Preston Hargrove, the third, leaned forward with a sudden, aggressive burst of motion and drove his expensive gold pen down onto the glass table right in front of her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you clearly don't know your place," he said, and he barked a cold laugh through the room. "This is Hargrove Whitfield. We manage serious wealth for serious families. Not cents, for community charities. Look at your plain coat. Look at your hands. People like you keep thinking a classroom degree makes you belong in a room of old money. It doesn't. You've been wasting my partner's time for 3 hours in the lobby. So let me have security walk you out before you embarrass your people any further. Go home. And don't come back until you can bring a real, white financial advisor who actually speaks our language." The two junior partners flanking him chuckled out loud. One of them flipped his phone over without even looking at her. Tucker Vance. Standing by the wall. Schmierked. They were waiting for the woman in the plain coat to gather her things and go, and Vivian Asante sat in the middle of that long black table, in a room full of men who had spent the morning telling her in 100 small ways that she was nobody. And she felt the last of the heat in her chest go cold and clear and still. The fury was gone now. What replaced it was something her father would have recognized. The quiet that comes right before you do the math, no one else in the room can do. She did not raise her voice. She had never once in her life needed to. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "may I ask you a question before I leave?" Preston, magnanimous in victory, spread his hands. "Of course. This morning, at 9:15, a gentleman named Mr. Pemberton walked through your lobby and was taken upstairs on the express elevator. No one asked him his business. At 9:40, a couple, I would guess, from a club somewhere, were greeted personally by a partner, given coffee and pastries, and walked into one of these rooms. I sat in your lobby from before 9 until just now, almost 3 hours. In that time, the only person in your entire firm who offered me a glass of water was a young man pushing a mail cart." She paused. "I'd like you to tell me, honestly, the way you've been so honest with me. What was different about me?" The smile on Preston's face flickered, just slightly, around the table. A few of the partners had stopped smiling because I've been doing this for 30 years myself. Vivian continued, in the same even, unhurried voice, "And I think I can save you some time. The thing that was different about me wasn't my fund size. You don't know my fund size. You never asked. It wasn't my track record. You never asked that either. You decided who I was the moment I walked across your marble floor, and everything that's happened since has been you defending that decision against the evidence." She tilted her head. "The smallest motion. Your firm has very good returns. Mr. Hargrove, I've read every quarter of them, but I didn't come here to audit your returns. I came here to find out who you are when you think the person across the table is nobody. And you've been very generous. You've shown me completely." The room had gone, the particular kind of quiet that happens when a thing that was supposed to be a formality is in front of everyone. becoming something else. Preston Hargrove's smile was gone now. In its place was the first small crack of a man who is beginning, against every instinct he has, to wonder if he has made a mistake. "I'm not sure what you think you're going to." He started. "I'm not finished," Vivian said, quietly, and the strangest thing happened. The thing that happens when authority that has been earned meets authority that has only ever been assumed. Preston Hargrove stopped talking. Vivian Asante reached into her old leather folder. She drew out a single document. She placed it on the black glass table, and she slid it down the length of it. Past the partner with his phone, past the partner with his pen, until it came to rest directly in front of Preston Hargrove III. Then she turned it so he could read it right side up. "This is the term sheet," she said. "For the mandate, you said, I don't have any business discussing. $1,200,000,000. It's been ready for 2 weeks. There are 2 signature lines at the bottom. One is for whichever firm we select." She let that sit. "The other one's already signed. It's mine. I have sole authority over this allocation. Mr. Hargrove. Seul. There is no man somewhere whose schedule matters more than mine. I'm the room you've been trying to get into for 14 months. She looked at him, and her voice did not rise, even a fraction. "And you just told me to go home and bring a real white advisor who speaks your language." You could have heard a pin drop on the marble 40 floors below. The door opened. A man hurried in, late 40s, breathing a little fast, a folder under his arm, and the slightly frantic energy of someone who has been told a meeting started without him. This was Marcus Webb, head of institutional sales, the man who had sent the 7 emails, the man who had spent 14 months of his professional life chasing this exact account, the man who had spoken to Sankofa's chief of staff so many times he could recite her direct line from memory, and who had never, not once, met the woman in charge. Sorry, I got pulled into." Marcus started, and then he saw the term sheet on the table in front of Preston. He saw the dollar figure, he saw the signature on the second line, and then he saw the woman in the plain coat sitting in the middle of the table, and Marcus Webb's face did something Vivian had been watching faces do her entire life, except faster and more completely than she had ever seen it happen before. The blood left it, because Marcus Webb, alone among everyone in that room, had done his homework. He had read about Dr. Vivian Asante. He had seen her photograph in the trade press, the one from the conference, where she had been named one of the most influential allocators in the country. He knew exactly who she was, and he understood. In one long, horrified second, every single thing that had just happened in this building over the last 3 hours. "Oh my God," Marcus said, very quietly. To no one. Preston looked up at him, irritated, still not understanding. "Marcus, we're in the middle of..." "Preston." Marcus's voice had gone strange. "Preston, do you know who this is?" "She's told me 3 times," Preston said, with a flash of irritation. "She's with some community. This is Dr. Vivian Asante." Marcus said the name like a man reading his own sentence. "She runs Sankofa. The Sankofa mandate. The account we've been. She's the decision maker. She's the only decision maker. I've been..." He stopped. He looked like he might be sick. "Preston, this is the account. This is the account. The $1.2 billion He turned to Vivian, and his voice cracked. Doctora Asante, I am so sorry. I don't know what's happened here this morning. But I'll tell you what happened. Mr. Webb, Vivian said, and for the first time her voice carried, not loud, but with a weight that filled the room and pressed every person in it back into their chair. Since you weren't here for it, and since you're the only person in this firm who seems to have bothered to learn who I am, I think you should hear all of it. And I think your partners should hear me say it out loud. So there's no confusion later about what this was. She did not stand. She didn't need to. She simply laid it out. In the same methodical, unhurried voice she had used to build the record on her phone an hour earlier. And the room sat in absolute silence and listened to itself be described. I arrived at 8:42 this morning. I drove myself. I came in plainly, with no delegation, because I wanted to see how your firm treats people it assumes are unimportant. That was a deliberate test, and you have passed it in the most complete way I have ever witnessed. She looked at the empty chair where the receptionist's desk waited downstairs in her mind. Then, at the men in front of her, your receptionist assumed I was catering. Then a job applicant. When I corrected her, twice. She sent me to a chair in the corner and did not offer me water. I watched her rise out of her seat for a white man named Pemberton and a white couple from a club, neither of whom she asked a single question. I waited there for nearly 3 hours. Then Mr. Vance came down. She did not look at Tucker, who had gone very pale by the wall. He told me there must have been a mix-up, that a fund my size couldn't possibly have a meeting with leadership, that I had probably confused a preliminary conversation with a real one. He offered to set me up with I want to get the name exactly right, your emerging and diverse accounts desk. He suggested entry products, vehicles with lower minimums, to help me get my foot in the door. He told me everybody starts somewhere. He told me he started in the mailroom. A pause. I doubt that's true, but the young man who actually works your mailroom was the only person in this building who treated me like a human being today. So perhaps Mr. Vance should spend some time down there and learn how it's done. And then you, Mr. Hargrove. Now she looked at Preston and held him. You didn't stand. You drove your pen into the table. You called me sweetheart. You told me I didn't know my place. You told me to look at my plain coat and look at my hands. You said, a classroom degree doesn't make people like me belong in a room of old money. You told me to stop embarrassing my people. And then you told me to go home and come back with a real, white financial advisor. Someone who could speak your language. Because in your mind, the language of money has a color, and it isn't mine. Marcus Webb had sat down heavily in a chair against the wall and put his face in his hands. I have a doctorate in financial economics. Mr. Hargrove, I've managed money through 3 downturns without losing a client's principal. The school teachers you sneered at are a retirement system whose members taught children in buildings this city couldn't afford to staff otherwise. And I have grown their fund by a multiple. Your firm's marketing department would kill to put on a brochure. The community charity you were so generous about is a coalition that controls more institutional capital than half your old money families combined. And the mandate you said I have no business discussing is $1 billion too, that, as of 14 minutes ago, your firm was 1 signature away from winning. Was, Vivian said. Preston Hargrove had not spoken in some time. The color in his face had shifted. First, the flush of a man caught, then a grayer thing underneath it as the actual numbers, the actual stakes, began to penetrate the armor of 61 years. He opened his mouth. What came out was smaller than anything he had said all morning. Dr. Asante. He cleared his throat. There's clearly been a terrible breakdown in communication, and I take that very seriously. These are good people. They were having a busy morning. And sometimes signals get, don't, Vivian said, gently, almost kindly, and it was the kindness that stopped him cold. Because it was the kindness of someone who has stopped being angry, which is a far more dangerous thing than fury. Don't tell me it was a breakdown in communication. It wasn't. Your communication was crystal clear. I understood every word. You all understood me too. I said my name, my title, and the size of the mandate more than once to every single one of you. You didn't mishear me. Mr. Hargrove, you disbelieved me. There's a difference. And the reason you disbelieved me is the one thing none of you will say out loud in this room. So I'll say it for you. And then I'll go. You looked at me. Vivian said, and you could not make my face fit the size of the number. And rather than change your assumption, you spent the morning trying to shrink me until I fit it. That is not a scheduling problem. That is who your firm is. When it thinks no one important is watching, someone important was watching. She said, me. Vivian Asante closed her folder and stood. For the record. Because there will be a record, she said. Hargrove Whitfield is no longer under consideration for the Sankofa mandate. Not the $1.2 billion. Not anything. Effective now. I'll be informing the coalition's board this afternoon, and I'll be recommending we award the full allocation to your competitor. A firm half your size, run by a woman you've probably never heard of, who returned my chief of staff's first call within the hour and addressed every email to me. She let that sit. I'll send your team a formal letter, but I wanted you to hear it from me. In this room, while you're all still sitting here, I find that lessons land better when they cost something. The number hung in the air over the black glass table like a body. $1.2 billion. Gone. Walked in the front door in a plain coat and walked back out. It is one thing to insult a person. People in that room insulted people every day. It was practically a sport. It is another thing entirely to watch the insult turn, in real time, into the single largest account loss any of them had ever been in the same room for. Vivian could see the math finally hitting them. Not the moral math. They weren't there yet. But the other kind, the only kind that had ever truly frightened them. Face. Bonuses. The annual numbers. The partners' meeting where someone would have to stand up and explain how the firm had managed to lose a 14-month billion-dollar pursuit in a single morning, in its own lobby. For free. A younger partner near the end of the table. He couldn't have been older than Tucker, said in a small, desperate voice. Dr. Asante. Please. Surely we can. There has to be a way to. The relationship doesn't have to end over a. There is no relationship, Vivian said. Not unkindly. There was never a relationship. A relationship requires that both people in it are real to each other. I was never real to you. I was a problem in your lobby. You can't repair something you never had. And then a new voice came from the doorway. Old, dry, and absolutely steady. He's right. Vivian, it doesn't have to end this way. But it's not these gentlemen who'll fix it. It's me. Everyone turned. Standing in the open doorway, leaning on a cane, she clearly used more for emphasis than support, was a woman of about 80, in an impeccable gray suit, silver hair cut short, eyes like a hawk's, and just as patient. This was Eleanor Whitfield, the W in Hargrove Whitfield, the last living founder, the daughter of the man who had started the firm with Preston's grandfather 70 years ago, and the one person in the building whose name was carved into the stone downstairs, who had also actually built something. She had been in her office down the hall. She had heard, through the open door, the rising tone of a meeting that was supposed to be a formality, and being 80 years old and afraid of absolutely nothing, she had come to see for herself. Eleanor, Preston said, half rising at last. For her, he rose. This is a private... Sit down. Preston, Eleanor said. She didn't raise her voice either. It ran in the family that mattered. Apparently, just not in his branch of it. She came into the room, slow and certain, and stopped at the foot of the long black table and looked at Vivian Asante for a long, appraising moment. Then she looked at the empty space on the glass, where the term sheet had been. Then she looked at her partners. At Preston. At Tucker, by the wall. At Marcus, with his head in his hands. And something in her ancient face hardened into iron. I've been standing in the hall for the last 10 minutes, she said. I heard most of it, and I want to say something to you. Dr. Asante, and I'd like you to let me say it before you go, because I'm too old to leave it unsaid. Vivian inclined her head. My father started this firm with $100 and a reputation for being the one man on the street whose handshake meant something. Eleanor said, he used to tell me there were two ways to be rich. You could be the kind of rich that opens doors, or the kind of rich that builds them. He built them. He died, believing he had handed his grandchildren a firm that opened its doors to anyone who walked in with something real to offer. Her eyes moved, slow and cold, to Preston. And I have just watched my father's name be used in my father's building to slam a door in the face of a woman who walked in with $1 billion and a doctorate and more dignity than anyone who insulted her will manage in a lifetime. Because she was black and a woman and didn't wear the right coat. She let it sit. Don't anyone in this room insult my intelligence by calling it anything else. I'm 81. I've watched this firm find 100 polite words for the same ugly thing my whole life. I'm done watching. She turned back to Vivian, and her voice changed. Not softer. Exactly. But stripped of everything except plainness. I can't fix what they did to you this morning. That's done. And it belongs to them. And they'll wear it. And I'm not going to insult you by asking you to reconsider the mandate, because if I were you, I wouldn't, and you shouldn't. You earned the right to take your $1 billion to people who treat your school teachers like the kings and queens they are. Take it, with my blessing, for whatever an old woman's blessing is worth. She tapped her cane once on the marble, but I am going to fix this firm because it's still got my father's name on it. And I'll be damned if the last thing I do on this earth is let it become the kind of place it was this morning. She turned to the table. And what came next, Vivian would later tell Renee, was worth almost as much as the apology she would never get. Preston, as of this moment, you're relieved of all client-facing responsibilities pending a full review by the board, which I will be chairing personally. Tucker Vance. Clean out your desk. You're done here today. And you can spend the afternoon learning whether everybody starts somewhere applies to you. Tucker made a sound. Eleanor ignored it. Marcus. You're the only one who knew who she was, and the only one who said sorry like he meant it. So you're going to help me tear this place down to the studs and build it back into something my father would recognize. Starting with the woman at the front desk, and the elevator she sends people to, and every unwritten rule in this building about who gets coffee and who gets a chair in the corner. She looked back at Vivian one last time. You came in here to find out who we are. Eleanor Whitfield said. You found out. Now you've shown the rest of us. 2. That's a gift, Doctora Asante. Even if it didn't feel like one this morning. Thank you for it. And for the first time all day, in that whole marble cathedral built to make her feel small. Someone in Hargrove Whitfield had looked at Vivian Asante and seen completely, exactly who she was. Vivian picked up her folder. Take care of Devon, she said. The young man with the mail cart. He was the only one of you who got it right when it cost him something. People like that are worth more than this whole building. Don't lose him. I'll have his name by the end of the day, Eleanor said. And a better one on his door by the end of the month? Vivian nodded once. Then she walked out of the conference room, past the gray faces and the silence, into the elevator, and down the express. This time, though no one had to tell it where to take her, she crossed the marble lobby of Hargrove Whitfield in her plain coat and sensible shoes, the same way she had come in, except that now every person who saw her go knew exactly what had just walked through their building. She pushed through the heavy glass doors into the cold, bright morning, took out her phone, and called Renee Boyd. It's done, she said. Award it to Callaway's shop. The full allocation. A pause on the line. Then Renee, who had known Vivian for 15 years and could hear everything she wasn't saying. How bad was it? Vivian looked up at the tower behind her. All that glass and stone and inherited certainty. 40 years of a name that meant, we decide who belongs. Bad, she said. But it's going to be useful. She had said it was going to be useful. Here is how she made it so. Vivian Asante could have done nothing. She had her $1 billion. She had her dignity. She could have driven home, poured a glass of wine, told the story to her husband, and let Hargrove Whitfield quietly bleed in private. A smaller person, or just a tireder one, would have. But Vivian had not built Sankofa by treating injustice as a personal grievance to be nursed. She had built it by treating injustice as a system to be redesigned, and a thing had happened to her this morning that happened to people like her constantly, invisibly, with no billion-dollar mandate in the folder to make anyone notice. She was simply one of the rare ones with the power to make it cost something, and she had learned long ago that when you are given that power, sitting on it is its own kind of complicity. So she got to work. The first thing she did was nothing dramatic at all. She wrote a letter, formal, two-page letter to the board of the Sankofa coalition, documenting precisely what had occurred during the on-site at Hargrove Whitfield. The times, the names, the words, all of it, exactly as she had recorded them on her phone in that leather chair. Not as a complaint, as a finding, because, she wrote, the coalition had a fiduciary duty to understand not just how a manager performed, but how a manager behaved. And a firm that treated a prospective client this way when it believed she was powerless would treat the coalition's most vulnerable members exactly the same way the moment it was convenient. The numbers had said Hargrove Whitfield was competent. The morning had said something the numbers couldn't. That competence in a firm with contempt at its core is a liability, not an asset, because contempt always, eventually, finds the people with the least power to fight it. The board read the letter. The board agreed. And the board did something it had never done before. It adopted, formally, a new requirement for every firm Sankofa would ever consider again. They called it the dignity standard. It was deceptively simple. Before any firm could be awarded a Sankofa mandate, the final stage of due diligence would include an unannounced, in-person visit by a representative who would not identify their seniority. A visit designed to reveal how the firm treated someone it assumed was unimportant. Performance got you to the finals. Character got you the money. The trade press, when it eventually got hold of the story, called it gimmicky. Then 3 other large allocators quietly adopted versions of it. Then a pension consortium in another state. Then a sovereign fund. Within 18 months, running a dignity check had become a real and feared phrase in the asset management world. And more than one famous firm discovered, painfully, that the way they had been treating receptionists, junior staff, and anyone in a plain coat was now a number on a balance sheet. Vivian never put her name on it publicly. She didn't need to. She knew where it came from. And so did Eleanor Whitfield. And that was enough. She got to watch it work. Up close. About a year on. Sankofa ran a search for a smaller mandate. And a famous firm downtown made the finals. A firm with a tower nearly as tall as Hargrove Whitfield's and a reputation just as sealed. Vivian sent a young woman to run the unannounced visit. Her name was Imani. She was a second-year fellow, 24 years old. And she walked into that lobby in a thrift store blazer with instructions to identify herself only as from Sankofa, and to say nothing about her seniority, which was, technically, none. What happened next almost made her cry. Not from hurt, for once, but from the shock of being treated well. The managing partner of that firm was a man named Howard Greer, 60 years old, who had heard the Hargrove Whitfield story at 3 separate conferences and had gone home after the third one and sat his entire staff down. When a young black woman in a cheap blazer walked into his lobby and said she was from Sankofa, the receptionist stood up, offered her water before she had finished her sentence, walked her up personally, and Howard Greer himself came out of his office, shook her hand, sat down across from a 24-year-old in a thrift store jacket, and spent 45 minutes answering her questions as if she were the most important person in his week. Because, as far as he knew, she might have been, and he had finally, late in life, understood that this was the whole point. You could not tell from a coat who was carrying the folder. So you treated everyone like they were, Imani asked him, near the end, a little dazed, why he was being so kind to someone he had never heard of. Howard Greer smiled and said, "A woman I never met taught me a very expensive lesson last year, and she never sent me a bill. I'd be a fool not to learn it." His firm got the mandate. Vivian saw to it personally and made sure he never knew exactly why. He had earned it in the only room that had ever really counted, the one where he thought no one important was watching. That was the dignity standard. Working the way she had dreamed it might, not as a punishment, as a quiet, spreading reason to be decent before you knew who you were being decent to. It turned out you could not legislate character into an industry, but you could make character profitable and contempt expensive. And Vivian had learned a long time ago that this was usually how the world actually changed. Not because people's hearts suddenly grew, but because the price of their cruelty finally came due, and they discovered, to their own surprise, that being better had cost them less than being cruel. The second thing she did was build a door. She took a portion of Sankofa's own management fees, real money, her money, and she endowed a fellowship, the Kwame Asante Fellowship, named for a Ghanaian engineer whose name never appeared on the bridges he saved. It paid for 10 young people a year, black, brown, first generation, the kids who were brilliant and broke, and who got the pause on the phone and the chair in the corner to spend 2 paid years inside the world of institutional finance, not in the mailroom, not on the emerging and diverse desk that firms used to quarantine people who looked like their clients. In the actual rooms, at the actual tables, learning the actual game. The one Preston Hargrove had told her took generations to learn, which was true. She realized, but only because men like him had spent those generations making sure certain people never got to start. The fellowship was her answer to that. You don't need generations. It said, you need someone to open the door once. After that, watch what we do. The first name on the very first fellowship list was Devin Pierce, because Vivian had kept her word. And so had Eleanor, the young man who had pushed a mail cart and crouched down next to a stranger's chair to offer her a bottle of water, turned out to be exactly what Vivian had suspected. A 22-year-old with a community college degree he had paid for himself. A head for numbers. Nobody at Hargrove Whitfield had ever once asked about, and a quiet, unteachable instinct for treating people like people. Eleanor pulled him out of building services within the week. The fellowship took him the following fall. 3 years later, he passed the last of his licensing exams. 5 years after the morning in the lobby, Devin Pierce was an analyst on Vivian's own team at Sankofa. And the first time a nervous founder in a cheap suit came in for a meeting and got sent to a chair in a corner by someone who had misjudged them, it was Devin who walked over, sat down beside them so he wouldn't loom, and said, "Can I get you some water? They're going to take good care of you here. I promise." He had learned the most important lesson in the building from the only person who had ever bothered to teach it to him. And he was passing it on. That was the whole point. That was Sankofa. The bird that flies forward while looking back. Hargrove Whitfield did not collapse. Old money rarely does. It's too well cushioned for that. But the mourning cost them in ways that compounded quietly for years. The lost mandate was the smallest of it. Word travels in that world. And the story of how a $40 billion firm lost $1 billion account in its own lobby in a single morning by telling the decision maker to go home and bring a real white advisor. That story traveled like wildfire, repeated at conferences, in elevators, over dinners, always with the same delicious, cautionary punchline. Two other prospective clients, both of them institutions that managed money for people who knew exactly what it felt like to be underestimated, quietly walked away during diligence. A recruiter the firm had been courting for a senior role took a different offer. She had heard the story too. The numbers were still strong. But Hargrove Whitfield had become, in certain rooms, a punchline and a warning. And there is no return high enough to fully buy that back. Eleanor Whitfield spent the last good years of her life making sure it bought back as much as it could. True to her word, she chaired the review herself. Preston was eased into a powerless emeritus role with a title, and no clients, eventually, into a retirement that fooled no one. Tucker Vance never worked in institutional finance again. The story followed him to every interview, and he discovered, as Vivian had quietly wished for him, exactly how far everybody starts somewhere gets you when no one will let you start. Marcus Webb, the one who had known, the one who had said sorry like he meant it, became, under Eleanor, the man who rebuilt the firm's culture from the lobby up. He started, on Eleanor's instruction, with the front desk. New training, new rules, a single unbreakable one, posted where every employee could see it. Everyone who walks through that door is somebody. Act like it before you know who they are, not after. He had it engraved on a small brass plate and mounted by the elevators, beneath the oil portraits of 4 generations of men who had needed to hear it most. Brooke, the receptionist, was not fired. She was retrained and watched. And, to her credit, Vivian heard later, she became something of an evangelist for the new rule. Perhaps because no one understood better than she did how easy it had been to break the old way, and how cheap it would have been to do better. Eleanor said, that was the most hopeful sign of all. People could change. They just had to be made to want to. And the woman who actually got the mandate, Denise Calloway, the founder of the Lean, Hungry, half the size shop that had returned Renee's first call within the hour, took that $1 billion too, and did exactly what Vivian had bet she would. She grew it, carefully, responsibly, through a rough market, never losing a client's principal. And she hired, over the next 5 years, more than a dozen people who had been told by firms like Hargrove Whitfield that they didn't have the right pedigree for rooms like hers. 2 of them were Kwame Asante Fellows. One of them, eventually, was Devon Pierce's younger sister. The capital had moved. But more than the capital had moved, a standard had moved. A door had moved. A whole quiet network of people who had spent their lives getting the pause on the phone and the chair in the corner had watched one of their own walk into the temple, get told to go home, and instead rearrange the entire room. And they had taken note and taken heart. And a few of them had decided that the next time they were underestimated, they too would build something out of it instead of swallowing it. That was the useful part. That was what Vivian had meant. standing on the cold sidewalk with the tower at her back. Not the $1 billion walking out the door. The thing that grew where the insult had been. About a year after that morning, Vivian Asante was asked to speak at a conference. The same kind of conference, in the same kind of hotel ballroom, where rooms full of people who controlled the country's money gathered to congratulate one another. She almost said no. Then she said yes. Because she had learned that the rooms you most want to skip are usually the ones that most need to hear from someone like you. She didn't talk about returns. She talked about a brass slide rule. She told them about her father, the engineer, whose name was on no bridge, who had taught her that people would look at her hands before they looked at her mind. She told them, without naming the firm, though half the room knew, about a morning she had spent in a marble lobby, being mistaken for catering, offered entry products, and told to go home and bring a real advisor who spoke the language of money. As if money had a color, she told them about a young man with a mail cart, who was the only person in a $40 billion building to offer her a glass of water, and about where that young man was now. And then she said the thing she had come to say, quietly, into a microphone, to a room full of the most powerful allocators in the country. Every one of you, she said, runs a building with a lobby, and every one of you has people walking into that lobby right now who you've already decided don't matter. You've decided it from their coat, or their car, or their accent, or their age, or the color of their skin. You've sent them to the chair in the corner. And here's what I want you to sit with tonight, because it's the only part of my story that should actually frighten you. She paused. I had $1 billion in my folder. That's the only reason any of you have ever heard this story. That's the only reason it cost anyone anything. But for every person like me, for every person who happens to be carrying the one thing powerful enough to make you regret your contempt, there are 10,000 people walking into your lobbies every day, carrying nothing but their dignity and their hope, and you are sending every single one of them to the chair in the corner. And it is costing you nothing. And you don't even know their names. She looked out at them. The measure of you is not how you treat the person you find out is important. The measure of you is how you treated them in the 2 hours before you knew. She let that land in a silent ballroom. My father could have built any bridge in this country. She said, you drive over his work, and you don't know it. The only thing that kept his name off those drawings was a room full of men, us, looked at his hands and never once looked at his mind. I built my whole life so that fewer people would have to live in that room. So, I'll leave you with the only question that matters. She gathered her notes. If a person's worth still has to be proven twice, once with the work, and once just to be believed, then who? Exactly. Decided that the first proof wasn't enough. And who has been getting rich all these years? Off the doubt. She didn't wait for applause. She picked up her bag. Her father's slide rule, a small, hard, familiar weight inside it. The one that remembered where she came from when the rooms tried to make her forget. And she walked off the stage and out into the night. That's the end of the story. But not the end of the question. This story is fiction. The firm isn't real. Preston Hargrove isn't real. Vivian Asante isn't real. But the lobby is real. The chair in the corner is real. The pause on the phone when the picture in someone's head doesn't match the voice coming through it. That's real. And if you've lived it, you felt every second of this story in your chest. Because you've sat in that chair, And you know exactly how long 3 hours can be when no one will look at your mind. So now imagine you're not Vivian. Imagine you're the country club couple who got the coffee and the pastries and never once wondered why the woman in the corner didn't. Imagine you're Tucker. Sure, you're just being honest. Imagine you're Brooke, deciding in 1 second who gets the warm voice and who gets sent to the corner. Imagine you're one of the partners checking your phone, waiting for the problem to go home. Or imagine you're Devin, the one with the least power in the whole building, the one who got it right anyway, when no one was making him, when it could have cost him his job. The water cost him nothing. The choice cost him everything he was afraid of. And he made it anyway. Most of us aren't Vivian. We don't get to walk in with $1 billion and rearrange the room, but every single one of us, every day, get to be Devin, or gets to be the partner checking his phone. That's the choice that's actually on the table for the rest of us. Not the grand reveal, the glass of water. So tell me, have you ever been the person in the chair, in the corner? What happened? And have you ever been in the room when it was happening to someone else? And what did you do? Be honest. The honest comments are the ones that change somebody's mind. If this hit you, if you felt that quiet fury in your chest, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with somebody who needs to sit with it, and subscribe. Because we tell these stories every single week, and we tell them loud. And the next time someone decides, from your coat or your car or your skin, exactly who you are before you've said a word, remember, Vivian, stay calm, stay exact, do the math. They can't, and never, ever let anyone send you to the chair in the corner of a room you were invited into.